Good afternoon. Welcome to all the alumni who are joining us today for this Third Thursday's conversation. I'm Janeen Bertsche Johnson, Director of Alumni, as well as other positions at AMBS, and I'm very glad you've joined us today. Just a couple of housekeeping details before we get started. If you would like to introduce yourself using the chat feature, please tell us who you are, where you're at, when you were at AMBS, and remember to send that to everyone, not just the panelists. And if you have a technical concern at any point during this webinar, just send a chat message to the AMBS webinar host. If you have a comment or question for our speaker, we ask that you use the Q&A feature, and you can find that by hovering over the bottom of your screen, and I'll be watching for those questions and comments, and I'll select the ones that I ask Malinda. Please note that the webinar, including questions, is being recorded. Turning now to our conversation. Malinda Elizabeth Berry is Associate Professor of Theology and Ethics and Director of the Faith Formation Collaborative. Malinda joined the AMBS faculty in 2014. She received her MDiv degree from AMBS in 2001 and her PhD from Union Theological Seminary in New York in 2013. Before coming back to AMBS, Malinda taught at Goshen College and at Bethany Theological Seminary. Malinda's going to start by answering several questions I have given her, and then after that, we'll have time for your questions and comments. Malinda, thanks for joining us today. And I have to tell you, yesterday, my Facebook memories reminded me yesterday was 10 years since you were announced as a new faculty member. And I just wanted to congratulate you that came about yesterday. So what would you like to tell us about yourself as an introduction?
Yeah, well, Janeen, I don't spend as much time on Facebook as I used to or as I might. And so I didn't have a chance to be reminded of that milestone. So Janeen, thank you for remembering, jogging my memory around that. Let's see. Well, one of the things that I'd like to start off by saying is that it's been a really meaningful experience to be at AMBS in this kind of period of transition. So 10 years ago when I arrived, I was on faculty with people who had been my professors. So Danielle Scapani, Ben Ohlenberger, Mary Schertz, Lauren Johns had been in the role of dean at that point. So it was really, it was meaningful to work with them and then be part of that generational changeover. So that now at this point, in terms of the regular faculty who show up at faculty meetings, that's a completely new group of people. And at the same time, I'm also joined by some people who had been my classmates at AMBS, Jackie Wise Rhodes and Rachel Miller Jacobs specifically. So that's just been, it feels like, you know, the circle is turning, the wheel is turning, and there's continuity and change. And that's been a great thing to be part of.
And personally, what would you like us to know about the things you enjoy doing and how, yeah.
Oh, let's see. So, and you know what, Janeen, you were at AMBS when I was a student, and you are like, I'm sorry that I failed to remember that too. But at a personal level, so I'm married and I have two kids, who are, let's see, they are 6 and 10 now. Time flies. And so that's like Jeremiah. One of the ways I can keep track of how many years I've been at AMBS is because he had his first birthday alongside my appointment, and so I can keep track that way. But yeah, so family life is something that certainly keeps me busy. Although this semester, in conjunction with one of the classes that I'm teaching, I have invited students to, and then I'm including myself in this, I've given myself this assignment too, is to have a regular Sabbath practice. And I was kind of inspired by Talasha Kaim-Yoder, one of our students, to include this. And it's in my Practicing and Embodying Nonviolence class. And so that has meant that I've also had a chance to get back to some of my knitting, which is something that I've enjoyed doing over the years a lot. And my knitting practice has sort of fallen away. So I'm looking forward to reinitiating that. And then I also have a variety of kind of community involvements. One of those that's been a lot of fun and pretty meaningful is that I, along with Darren Short, am co-chair of the board at Maple City Market, which is a cooperative grocery store here in Goshen, which is where I'm based now. And so it's been great to have that be a kind of outlet for some of my interests around environmental stewardship, which is another thing that that I get to. There's like wonderful crossover with my work at AMBS around that kind of work too. So those are a few things. Keeping up with my kids and my family. Oh, playing board games is something that I also enjoy doing. Knitting and providing community-based leadership around food sustainability issues and questions.
Wonderful. And I must note, you also have brought color to AMBS. You love color.
I do. It's true.
So I wore my most colorful shirt today in honor of
Awesome.
you.
Well, and you can't quite see it, but the fabric of the curtain that's behind me, it's
Okay.
monarch butterflies feeding on milkweed.
Wonderful.
And all different colors and patterns and things like that. Yeah. Okay. And along these lines, I also have to give props to Marlene Krupp, who would often dress with the colors of the liturgical
Yes.
season. And that kind of inspired me. I don't dress with the liturgical season as much as like I have, each of my classes has a color because I'm a big color coder. And then I wear that color when I teach class. So that has meant needing to make sure that I've got the resources in my wardrobe to keep up with my color coding system.
I had not noticed that you wore the same color for each class period. So that's awesome. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a story or two about when you experienced God in a powerful way. This has been one of the meaningful questions that I've asked everyone from our faculty. And I always look forward to hearing the stories. So what would you like to share?
Yeah. So of course you shared that question with me earlier in preparation for this. And so I've been thinking about that and curious about that. And what experience would sort of rise to the surface for me. And I think there are several experiences that I could point to, but maybe the one that I'll share about in this setting and in this context was something that actually happened just last semester. I was teaching a class it was kind of a newer course. We've worked, so I teach out of the History, Theology, and Ethics department, HTE, Theology and Ethics, as Janeen's already mentioned. But we've been doing some curricular revision there and trying to figure out what's the right constellation of course content that we want to make sure our students get across the degree programs that we offer. And so we've developed kind of a new course that combined content from two different classes. And so it's called Peace Theology, Christian Ethics and Peace Theology. And when I teach this particular class, well, all my classes actually, we sit in a circle and I use a modified version of circle process as part of my approach to teaching, a part of my pedagogy, I guess you'd say. And I also like using name tags. This might seem like a funny or strange thing to be doing in a seminary class, but especially in this case, it provided a really unique opportunity for God to show up in a powerful way. So on the name tags, I include students' first name and their last name. It's also a way for students to get to know each other. This was a blended class. So I also had some students who joined us by Zoom, and then we have these little placard name cards that then represents them in the circle, so that we don't have to worry about, oh, right, the people on Zoom, they're embedded right there in our circle. So on the first day of class, I asked, like, students were sort of joking about these name tags, and they weren't used to seeing that, and so I invited people to tell us about their last names. And one student said, well, like, what, why do we need to talk about that? Well, one of the things that I knew from my experience of being with a really international student body at AMBS as a student is that in places like Indonesia, they don't have last names or use last names in the same way we do in North America. And there was one student from Indonesia in the circle. And I also had learned, having students from Ethiopia, that similarly there, they don't have, like, their naming conventions are very different. And there are several students from Ethiopia in the circle. And so they clued right into why we were going to have this conversation. And as we went around the circle, we heard some really interesting, but also deeply powerful stories about identity. And that ended up being kind of a theme throughout the rest of the class. But after hearing those stories, I thought I was going to need to make a link between, well, what do last names have to do with Christian ethics? But one of the students, just kind of spontaneously as part of the discussion and conversation, like, made the exact point that I was going to make. And this underscores one of the foundational principles of circle process, at least in the way I was introduced to it, that there is wisdom in the room and in the circle that is greater than any of us can bring as individuals. And so this deeply intercultural conversation where people were being vulnerable, where because in the following week, that was kind of my check-in question was, what do you remember about our discussion from last week? Like, what has stayed with you? And the students from the 3 students from North America, actually, one of them was born in Canada, and the other 2, actually one had been born in Brazil but has lived as an adult in the United States, and the other was also from the US. Talked about how humbling it was for them to realize how many of their classmates were using names, were going by names that they were kind of forced to use to participate in our educational system in the United States, and isn't actually the name that they use in their home country and context. And that was really sobering and humbling, to learn that, and taught them to, like, a new way of being curious about other people's experience of coming to this country, of engaging with people across cultures. Anyway, it just felt like I learned something more about the people of God and what can happen when we gather, and hold our kind of our Christian commitments and our desire to be Jesus' disciples at the center of a circle. So it's a long answer, but like that's what I like. That's the thing that came to my mind most clearly when when you asked me that question today.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And what a teaching moment too for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So another question that I ask everyone is, what attracted you to be part of the AMBS community? And for you, that has 2 parts, first as a student and then as a faculty member.
Yeah, well, so I'll start with the second part first. That is, I was attracted to coming to AMBS as a faculty member in large part because of my experience as a student. I do think of AMBS as kind of one of my intellectual homes. And having spent time in other parts of the theological academy, I wanted to be back at home, right? Would be one way to say it. And like my appreciation of home was deepened by having had these other experiences that taught me some things that I, of course, bring back with me. But yeah, it's kind of like Dorothy says in The Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home. But to go to the first part of the question, what attracted me as a student? Well, and I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I had been tapped on the shoulder in college, encouraged to consider seminary. I had done the ministry inquiry program in college, and in fact, had been a one-course student. I asked one year as a Christmas present. This was after I had several gap years between college and kind of the next thing. And I asked as a Christmas present for one class at AMBS. And so I took ecclesiology with Gail Gerber Kuntz. And I was like, I am never going to seminary. was my response to that experience. Hey, like I was a young adult, so I always reserved the right to change my mind too. So I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. and working at a nonprofit organization. And I was working, it was just like an entry-level job. I was the administrative assistant in the development division. And part of what that meant was when we were doing direct mail appeals, it was my job to rustle up the volunteers and staff and go to the conference room and stuff envelopes. So we're stuffing envelopes. And I saw some names that I recognized. I was like, oh, I know them. I know those people. It was Willard and Mary Swartley was one of the names on the. And then I also, John and Pauline Fisher, Russ and Marge Lichty. And I was like, oh, I know all these people. And the folks I worked with were like, how do you know that you know them? Like we've got thousands of letters and envelopes we're stuffing here. And I was, and I was like, well, Willard and Mary live next door to my aunt. And, I was explaining like, I actually know these people. And that was surprising to the people I worked with. That, I think, experience helped me understand how unique or special this community was that I came from. Not just that like I knew these folks among the thousands of letters that are appeal letters that are going out, but that I actually came because the nonprofit I worked for was part of the nuclear disarmament and peace movement, that I actually came from this community that was committed to nuclear disarmament and a peace economy and challenging the national logic of defense spending in the United States. That was unique among the people I was working with, people who I looked up to. And so to discover like I had this kind of gift in coming from this community kind of started sort of, that started working on me. And I ended up working for this organization a little over a year, but it was kind of in that next 6 months or so that I realized, I do want to go on to graduate school. And so I had several options that I was considering, from museum studies to American studies, which is like an interdisciplinary humanities program, and seminary. And seminary was the thing that sort of tugged at me the most, because I wanted to better understand the contours of kind of Mennonite peace theology, basically. So that's how I ended up at AMBS.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
The next question I want to ask you is about the courses you're teaching. But before I let you say that, I just need to say to everyone, yesterday I asked one of our students, what have your favorite courses at AMBS been? And without much thought, they just blurted out anything Malinda has taught. So what do you teach, Malinda? And tell us about at least the courses you're teaching this year. But if there's others you want to highlight as well, just give us a brief glimpse of what's part of each of those courses, because you really do teach a lot of fun courses.
Yeah. So, well, and the courses that I've taught have changed over the years. But my current I describe them as my portfolio of courses. My current portfolio of courses includes a range of both introductory courses and then more advanced electives. So at the introductory level, I teach this Christian ethics and peace theology, which is it is the successor to what had been thinking ethically, and then we used to have this systematic theology sequence, Christian Theology 1 and Christian Theology 2, and Jamie Pitts taught Christian Theology 1, and I taught Christian Theology 2. So we've sort of rearranged that a little bit, and Jamie now teaches kind of more advanced theology course in Anabaptist perspective, and so I teach this Christian ethics and peace theology as a way of introducing students to both theology and ethics, because that's one of the things that I would definitely say, having engaged in theological conversations in a variety of places, that is I won't say unique, but certainly a special part of how Anabaptist Mennonites do theology and ethics, is that we really keep those deeply integrated. You don't it's hard for us to separate theology and ethics. So this course does a look like it sort of explains that and orients our students to that unique part of our tradition. And then another kind of introductory level course that I teach is, well, I guess now that I think about it, if the course number 500 or 600 is an indicator, most of the classes I teach are at the 600 level. But a course that I'm teaching this semester is called Practicing and Embodying Nonviolence. This is a course that we developed especially for our peace studies students, but it's open to anybody to take. And this offers students a kind of framework for thinking about, well, not just thinking about, but sort of integrating the practices of peacemaking and peace theology, and I would say kind of the spirituality of nonviolence into their lives in both practical and intellectual kinds of ways. So we work at the knowing, doing, being integration. And so this also then becomes a place to orient students to AMBS's legacy of peace theology, how peace theology has been as an intellectual project, been a prominent part of AMBS's life as an institution. And then it's also an opportunity for us to talk about some of the failures of Mennonite peace theology over the decades. And then my particular, I guess, twist, I would say, that I put on that as I think of myself as kind of like a third generation peace theologian, is bringing social emotional learning into the conversation. So this gets us at kind of psychology and spirituality as much as it gets us into biblical hermeneutics and kind of Christian social ethics. Then the other, like in the elective arena, I teach a class called Church and Race, which is a class that I inherited from Gail Gerber-Kuntz. And this was a course that she had developed as part of AMBS's kind of initial commitments around to do anti-racism work that came out of the Damascus Road process that started when I was a student. So that's been a significant kind of thing for me to receive and continue. I also teach a class called Suffering and Hope, which looks at questions of evil and what has traditionally been called theodicy. How, like, why does God let bad things happen to good people? To use there was a famous book written by that title. And then we also look at eschatology. And so I like teaching that class whenever I can in the second semester, because that we get into Lent and Easter, along with the change of seasons from winter to spring, as a way of thinking theologically and ecologically about a lot of that symbolism that's been especially important to Christians in the Northern Hemisphere. I teach a class called Earthkeeping, which had been creation care, a course that I inherited from Ted Kuntz, and he at different points co-taught it with Luke Gasho. And so Earthkeeping is a way of kind of advancing some of that conversation, because in the decades since they originally taught that class, we've learned a lot more about the changing climate. And we have students who are coming in with a lot more sort of working knowledge and awareness, and are ready to take their commitment to environmental stewardship to a deeper level. And let me think here for a moment. Oh, I also teach human sexuality and Christian ethics, another class that's been offered for many years at AMBS. And this has been the course, like it's not necessarily a challenge for me to teach, but like of all the classes that have come to me to teach, this would be the one that I would have chosen, or would have been like at the bottom of the list. Not because I'm squeamish about talking about sex and sexuality, but because of how complex the terrain is around that conversation. But it's also been really rewarding to watch students come to that class saying, you know, I'm in this class because I grew up in a community or in a congregation that did not talk about sex, and I want to figure out how to change that. Leaving feeling more empowered. But the other thing about that particular course that teaching that class has given me a chance to reflect on personally is that oddly enough, I came from a congregation that I didn't realize it until I needed to teach this class, talked a lot about sex and sexuality, and prepared me in some ways that, again, I hadn't really realized, to offer students like, well, here is a way that you can address some of these issues in some really powerful ways, and gently break through cultures of silence in congregations. So yeah, so that's what I'm up to these days in the classroom. I think I got all the courses.
And you don't teach all of those every year. A lot of them are every other year. Okay.
Especially in the electives. Yeah. Yeah.
And then on top of your teaching load, you do some administrative work. Do you want to describe that briefly? Sure.
So several years ago, I had my turn being department chair. But now we're glad to have Joe Lichty hanging around and doing some of that work for us. But now I am the director of the Faith Formation Collaborative, as you mentioned in the introduction. And this is what used to be the Center for Faith Formation and Culture. I guess it's been a little over a year ago, like maybe 18 months or so ago. Bev Lapp, our dean, worked with others in the ad cabinet to develop the Center for Faith Formation and Culture, to kind of revise it or revision it a little bit and expand it, because where it did have one faculty member with dedicated load when Andy Brubaker-Caitler was part of our faculty. This reformation brought two of us on board. So for a year, Andy and I were both in the Faith Formation Collaborative. He continued to have a particular focus on youth, and then part of what my job was to do was to kind of figure out how we expand the focus of the center, now collaborative, to reach across the age span. So part of my administrative work there was to participate in a review of the existing programs that have been part of the center, and then start thinking about what other things we wanted to add to our work in the collaborative with more people power, and so we worked to rustle up some more resources in this past year. So I worked with Shanna Peachy Beauchart to develop a grant proposal, and we were also helped by AMBS student and professional grant writer Dave Johnson, who gave some invaluable advice and encouragement. So yeah, do you want to Want me
And
to
then
talk
the
about that a little bit
exciting
more?
news that
Yeah.
I think we're still, it hasn't even really been shared with the alumni much yet. So
Yeah.
tell us what came of that.
So the Lilly Foundation, the Lilly Endowment, had lots, oodles and oodles of money that they needed to give away and or share with communities in different ways. And so they initiated a second round of their Thriving Congregations initiative. Maybe some alumni were on the recipients of some of like that first round of Thriving Congregations grants, and so they kind of building on some of the things that people had learned out of that philanthropic enterprise. Lilly said, "Hey, let's keep working on this agenda." And what they were particularly interested in was, and they put in the request for proposals, is Lilly is interested in helping congregations find ways to do three things. One, adapt to their changing social and cultural context, recognizing that we seem to be living in a time where change, the pace of change is pretty rapid, is moving at a pretty rapid rate. Secondly, to gain clarity about their values and mission in these rapidly changing social and cultural milieu that they find themselves in. And then thirdly, cultivate Christian practices that deepen the faith of their congregants. So these are things that are of deep interest to us here at AMDS and within Mennonite Church USA and Mennonite Church Canada. So we put together a proposal that we were successful with. And so we received just under $1.25 million, and it's a 5-year grant. And so that's the amount that we have to work with over the next 5 years. And I can talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of what it is that's going to be in our project. But I do want to quickly say here that this funding is making it possible for us to hire 2 staff people, one at full time, and then the other will either be half-time or 3/4 time to work in the collaborative, which we're very excited about. But the other thing that we're excited about is that during this 5-year period, the program that we developed, which has several parts, and it has to do with helping congregations practice discernment, reinvigorate Bible study through a process called confessional Bible study that Mary Schertz and others at AMBS developed through some other Lilly initiatives in the past. So I'm super excited about confessional Bible study because I think it is the most amazing thing before or after sliced bread. And I'm not just saying that because Mary Schertz is on this webinar, but I am saying it because Mary Schertz is on the webinar. And so we'll be putting together these congregational cohorts or groups, teams, that then connect with other congregations, forming a network or a learning community of congregations. And we're super excited about this. So if you out there in our alumni network have people who you think would be good for these positions that we're going to be hiring for, or you're in congregations or know of congregations you think would be really excited and benefit from being part of this learning community, I want you to feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, so Janeen, should I go ahead and say a little bit more about the particulars of what our project is going to do?
Well, I think, yeah, just a bit about what you're hoping. What I know, things are still needing to be developed.
Yeah. Well, what I can say that we put into our proposal, as I've already mentioned, is this process where congregations develop teams. The teams come together to form cohorts, and then the cohorts go through essentially a 4-step process, a 4-stage process. And the first is working in their congregational settings to understand their context. And what that means is we're going to be teaching, that is folks at the seminary, and probably also some of our alumni. think the reality is we're going to need to pull together from a range of people who are interested in this kind of work to help make it happen. But the seminary sages are going to provide the congregational teams with tools to figure out what it means to read context. And we'll be using information that you can get about your watershed, about census data, about your demographics, to help congregations tell a story of their congregations in their context, and then figure out and ask questions about how much the makeup of the congregation is either similar to or different from the makeup of the place where they find themselves. And then because part of what this is oriented around is helping congregations tell a realistic and truthful story about who they are, because it can be very easy for us to tell nostalgic stories about our congregations, right? So how do we kind of peel away some of the pink lenses, the rose-colored glasses, to sort of be honest about where we are and how our congregations are weathering these seismic changes that have been happening over the last decades. Then the second part involves engaging the Bible, and teams will come to campus, and because of the grant funding, we'll be able to support their travel, right, for a multi-day training in confessional Bible study, which is a process of engaging the text, artful response, and worship. How do we do all of these three things together, remembering that we engage the Bible because it's our sacred text, and the life of faith depends on having a living relationship with this scriptural text, this ancient text. And then the third, and so then teams will be equipped and ready to design and lead their own Bible study, confessional Bible study process in their congregations, especially kind of in light of the context and the contextual story that they are now able to tell and share. The third part of the process involves helping the teams harvest the fruit of their contextual analysis and their biblical study, right? And once they've kind of collected this information, it will allow them to engage in a congregational, this is the fourth part, a congregational discernment process. Okay, so in light of all the stuff that we've learned about ourselves, about where we fit in the world, and how the Bible informs our perspective on these things, what does it look like for us to be good news in this place where we are, right? And so we'll also have some money set aside to make kind of seed grants to help some of these congregational initiatives get off the ground. So I'm pretty excited. I mean, it's a lot of work, and it's but just talking about it, I get excited, and people are excited when they hear about what we're doing. So hopefully that's true of the folks who are in the webinar too.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I'm so glad to hear more about it. Well, this might be a better time to just ask if you have a particular dream for AMBS. Obviously, this is one of those dreams, is that we are part of revitalizing congregational life and Bible study and all that. But are there other dreams you have for AMBS?
It's so interesting you asked that, Janeen, because yes, I do. And it's like, well, so I'll just paint a picture. So when so I was born and raised in Goshen and lived in other places, but when I would come back and visit, especially in the summertime, I started noticing this quilt garden tour. I think there's a group maybe in Middlebury that does this. And so sometimes the quilt gardens are, like plants, or the quilts are kind of plants in a symmetrical shape. And sometimes there are these murals, right, that hang in different places. But, the idea is that people can follow this tour and see these different landmarks. Well, I got inspired after reading about this storytelling quilt that Sunitha Millsaps and Terry Geyser developed at Community Mennonite up in Markham. And it was this congregational partnership between Community and Hively Avenue that created this. And it's this amazing, powerful story, which then is also connected to work that Terry and Charlie had done in Colombia, using storytelling, fabric arts, to do trauma healing work. And then when my family originally moved back to this area, we were living in South Central Elkhart. And so I became acquainted with the way Jason Schenk was doing, and others at what had been the Prairie Wolf Collective, would take people on a walking tour, doing a people's history of South Central Elkhart, learning about how systemic racism shaped the life of the community, and then kind of inviting us as Mennonites to reflect a little more critically about, well, how are we part of the problem? How are we part of solutions of making South Central Elkhart a healthy and vibrant part, and like to bring life and thriving to those neighborhoods. So then I kind of got it in my head, wouldn't it be interesting to do like an alternative storytelling quilt garden thing in South Central Elkhart with both fabric quilts and murals and some of the landscaping stuff that we have done at AMBS in Restoring the Prairie, and the Dismantling Doctrine of Discovery Coalition's work that helped us, and you were a big part of this, Janeen, identify the Indian Trail that goes through our campus and put markers there. Like, what would it look like to create this alternative kind of quilt garden tour of South Central Elkhart that brings together the quilting histories of both European and African American communities. And I don't know, I think that could be an awesome thing that AMBS could do, be a hub for, and would connect Mennonites and South Central Elkhart in some really powerful ways. So that's my answer
very
to
cool.
your question.
That's very cool. And then one final question, and then we're getting some questions from from the alumni as well.
Yeah.
Are there any particular current research interests that you want to highlight before we go to the other questions?
Sure. So I continue. Well, one of the things that I started, one of the research trajectories that I embarked on as part of my dissertation research was working with the More with Less cookbook, Living More with Less, and then Mennonite Central Committee also published Extending the Table, which Joetta Hundrich Schlabach put together, and that was kind of like volume 2 of Living More with, or of More with Less. And then Simply in Season came along as kind of a little bit of a corrective to the heavy frugality of More with Less. Kathleen Hockman-Wirt and Mary Beth Lind were the compilers and editors of that particular cookbook. So those are called those three cookbooks together are called the World Community Cookbook series. So I continue to it's less maybe research around the story and the development of those cookbooks, and more development of the theology that I have argued is evident in this trio of cookbooks, along with the companion Living More with Less. And nobody gets tired of hearing me talk about that, apparently. And so this last year, during Lent, I preached a series of sermons at North Baltimore Mennonite Church. They were working with the life standards from Living More with Less. So that continues to be a place where I put a lot of energy and intellectual energy and effort.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to turn to a question from Naun Serato.
Okay.
He's got two questions. So the first one is, due to the diversity of students in the classroom, how do you manage the tone, content, and style of teaching, particularly when there are students from different countries? And so he was articulating things like speed, language, method change. Thank you, Naun, for that. And then we'll come to
That's
his
a great
second
question.
questions after you have a moment to answer that one.
Yeah. So I've mentioned this approach to circle practice that I use. It's called the Circle Way. And I learned about it when I arrived at AMBS 10 years ago. It's something that Maple City Healthcare Center had introduced into communities that AMBS is kind of adjacent to that, through the leadership of James Nelson Gingrich and others. And that really changed my life in some powerful and positive ways. But as it relates to Naun's question specifically, I have found that some of the principles of the Circle Way are really useful for empowering students to ask their questions. We use talking piece counsel. So, I find it very easy, as is, appropriate for my profession, I suppose, to just like start mini lecturing about anything. But when I'm in circle and we have a noisemaker, often like a bell or a chime, or just even my own circle practice that teaches me how to be tuned into the people I'm talking to, I have learned that sometimes like I can actually read the room and like see when people are, they've had enough. And so I can stop and take the talking piece, which is in my class, it's often a hacky sack, and we just send it around the circle, inviting each person to ask their question, offer a reflection. And if they don't have anything to say, we can just sit in the silence too. Allowing people who are more maybe introverted to not feel like the only way to participate in this discussion is to, get your hand up and be ready to go right away. So I've also learned from contemplative spirituality, right, that it's okay to slow down the pace of the conversation, so that I don't see the cultural diversity as maybe an obstacle to overcome or something to minimize, but as a really important resource for our learning as a group. So I hope that answers your question, or that first question.
That's great. And then he's also asking, how does AMBS help professors teach students with different levels of Christian formation or spiritual formation or English Anabaptist formation? I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but how aware are you of that, the differences between what students bring and how do you work in the classroom? And I hear him asking not just about you, but are there conversations among the faculty? Thank you, Naun, for both of those questions.
Yeah, so one of the committees that I serve on, I guess I could have answered or added this when you asked about administrative responsibilities. So I'm part of the pedagogy advisory group, and one of the things that we do is we get together on a regular basis as part of our work at AMBS to address some of these kinds of intercultural dynamics and what are some of the teaching practices and opportunity, like training, professional development opportunities we want to make sure that AMBS faculty are able to work on. We create opportunities for people to workshop syllabi together or ask some of these kinds of intercultural questions in a space that sometimes we invite other folks into the conversation, and our teaching research seminar is another place where intercultural teaching and development is something that we work at together. So I would say, one of the things that these conversations highlight is that some of us are maybe more predisposed to like think about pedagogy as a content area that we are just as serious about learning from as our teaching content area. So I care about just as much about theology and ethics and pedagogy, right? Like I see these of being equal value. And then other colleagues who maybe have less of a formal pedagogy background, then rely on those of us who do take this content area seriously and are well read in that. Like so we get to be kind of teachers to our colleagues too on this front, because everybody has different kind of interest in getting down into sort of so like if Janeen is my colleague, it's like, hey Malinda, like I just ran into this challenge and I know you think a lot about this, like is there a resource you can point me to? So Janeen might be looking for more of like a technical fix, and so I can draw from the well of resources that I have to help her out. So that's another way I think that we work at it. But I mean, it is ongoing work, and I think one of the things I think about in these conversations is how important it is to have a spirituality of teaching. There's just something I learned from Danielle Scapani, but we also are working to develop a spirituality of multiculturalism and interculturalism and anti-racism at AMBS too.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill Block is noting that you have so many things that you are doing and interests that you have, and I think is asking, how do you stay healthy in the midst of that, and how do you work with like Paul the Apostle kind of saying he has one focus, although we probably realize Paul had many foci also.
Foci, yeah.
But I hear in Bill's question, how do you care for yourself in the midst of the many interests, the many activities, the many responsibilities you have? Thank you, Bill, for that. It's a great question.
It is a great question. So I would say in two ways. One is a long time ago, I sort of, and pardon if you could, my dog's barking in the background. Hopefully it's not too bothersome. But I like to think about my way of teaching and being a scholar and these kinds of things using the analogy of an analogy that I get from medicine, right? Where and people who are like you have different kinds of surgeons, because I used to watch Grey's Anatomy. So they're like, among the surgeons, you've got the people who are the neurosurgeons and they specialize in this. And then you've got people who specialize in fixing bones and all these different specialties. Well, I'm a general surgeon, right? So what that means, that's one of the reasons why I have this like wide array of interests, because I, like, if there are questions that the church is asking, I want to be able to figure out how to be responsive to that. And that's part of what a general surgeon can do, lots of different kinds of procedures, right? But then if you have a highly specialized problem, then you're going to go to a highly specialized and skilled surgeon. So I like being kind of on that front line of folks who respond when there's a theological question that we're wrestling with. That's part of what gives me life and energy and joy in this work. But then my second way of answering that question is the self-care piece of it that you've highlighted, Janeen. So I do have a series of practices that I take seriously and cultivate. One of them is an empathy practice that I have. So I meet with, it's kind of like a spiritual friendship in some ways, but it's focused around nonviolent communication and a protocol of giving and receiving empathy, listening empathically. Because part of the theory there is that empathy multiplies. That is, when I have been received empathically by another, that increases my capacity to offer empathy to other people. And one of the things that a big part of the harvest that I have gathered in from that practice, which is now like 6, 7 years old, is that it allows me to detach a little bit more when somebody's having a crisis, rather than sort of dropping everything I'm doing and responding to that crisis, which is kind of what I used to do and get overwhelmed by what's happening. I've learned how to offer compassion to people in a way that is authentic and meets them and connects with them and demonstrates my care for them, without taking on the responsibility of trying to help them solve their problem. Right. So that's been important in helping me kind of build and create boundaries. But going back to what I was saying about the general surgeon, that surgery analogy, also helped me stop comparing myself so much to friends and colleagues who have a much more narrow focus to their work than I do, that allows them to go deep and then just like write books and books and books and books and books. I'm not quite that person. And so and my empathy practice kind of helps me embrace the fact that I'm not that person, and it's okay that I don't function in that way. But and then I also practice yoga, but I don't know how people on this call feel about yoga, so we don't have to talk about that too much.
Well, thank you, Malinda, for answering all these questions, and what a wonderful insight into your work at AMBS and your interests. And thank you to all of our alumni for being here today, and especially for your ongoing support of AMBS. I've said this so many times, but alumni really are our most important influencers in the church, both prospective students and donors. So keep encouraging people to consider attending seminary. Note that we have a prospective student webinar coming up in less than 2 weeks on January 30th. And Malinda will be the speaker at that, giving a little mini lecture on one of the things she teaches in one of her classes. So we'd love to have you encourage someone to attend that. Also, if you have not yet given to the AMBS campaign that's happening this year, we'd love to have you participate in that, or to encourage others to give to that. And finally, I hope you're staying connected to the seminary through ongoing classes and the Church Leadership Center offerings. There's still a couple of days to sign up for pastors and leaders at the early registration rate. And if you're an AMBS graduate, there's a special audit rate for you to take classes. So if you'd like to take a class this summer or next fall, just let me know. Next month, on February 15th, our next Third Thursday conversation will feature Dan Schrock, who teaches spiritual direction at AMBS and also helps lead the Doctor of Ministry program. Thanks again to all of you who've joined us this afternoon, and also to student Janet McGeary, who provided technical support. And this concludes today's Third Thursday conversation. Have a wonderful day.